Hi, I'm Brenda Such. Welcome to COIPcast, where we talk about new, trending, or just fascinating technologies in online education. Today, we are moving on from the technical side to how designs within learning management systems impact student learning. Today, we have Kristin Powers, Director of Marketing and Customer Engagement at Cidi Labs. In addition, I'd like to welcome my COIP colleague, Lori Gibbons, Assistant Director of Graphic and Web Design. Lori will be doing double duty today as co-host and guest. Welcome, Lori and Kristin.
Hello.
All right, so our show has 3 segments where we'd like to get to know your experiences and thoughts about online education's past, present, and future. So in our first segment, Digital Origin Story, or DOS, Lori and Kristin, let us know how you got involved with online education. So Lori, we'll start off with you.
Well, I got started in online education just about 10 years ago. I've been a designer for quite a long time, but I've always been interested in how design impacts education and just designing for any kind of university or higher education system. And I got started actually in learning management systems at Athens Technical College in Athens, Georgia.
Shout out to Athens.
Woo, Athens. But so I did that at Athens Technical College, and it was a really great foundation for the rest, that's whenever I got into web design and design for education. And then I got a job here at UF as a web designer. And now I'm a multimedia specialist.
Yes.
And now I do I'm the assistant director for graphic and web design here at COIP. And we design online learning experiences. So now I get to design just 100% online learning experiences.
Cool. And Kristin?
I did a little math because I was trying to figure out how to summarize some of my experiences. So I added up that I've worked on 21 educational software products, 14 digital games, 13 STEM products, 7 ESL language or reading products, 2 custom LMSs, and 1 adaptive learning platform. So I've got a lot of varied experience, but it first started, I was into computers as a kid. I taught as a young adult. I taught in grad school, and then I landed a job in 2009 in an educational games company. Cool. So that company, we made a couple different products, but we got to work with Florida Virtual School, McGraw-Hill, and this company, Voyager Sopris. And when I left from there, I went to Voyager Sopris, and that was actually my first time having the title of instructional designer. So before that, I really didn't know about the field. It was sort of this thing where I knew how to teach, I knew what students and learners needed, and I knew how to help get them to that place. But that was the first job where it got to come together. So I worked as an instructional designer there, and then I moved to Seattle and worked for a company called Intentional Futures, which is a research and design consultancy. So they do a lot of strategy for other bigger organizations. So the primary one I worked with was the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And that time in that job was amazing because I got to work with a whole vast number of people at all these different institutions across the country, learning about what works and what doesn't with online learning. So we did a whole research paper just on instructional designers. We also did a report on online learning called High Tech, High Touch. Was all about how inclusivity and support and like the feeling of being with others matters in online learning. From that work, I did a little bit of a brief flirtation with corporate learning. Not for me. Okay. Still the same premise, right? Sure. Just applied to different things. And then I worked for a company called CourseTune, which is a company that was making software for visualizing how learning objectives connected to course content. So still working with instructional designers, but I was their director of storytelling. So I kind of moved my role to being able to help tell the stories of instructional designers and help people who are working in this field really get the knowledge about how the work they do really impacts learners. Because I think a lot of times in online learning, we are justifying why we're doing what we're doing. And so I've kind of moved from the field of doing the thing to talking about the thing to helping support the people who do the thing. So in the current role at Cidi Labs, I'm doing similar stuff that I did at CourseTune. So I'm now the director of marketing for them, and we build tools for instructional designers and course designers. And I get to work with people in online learning every day, helping them amplify the good that they're doing with these tools.
That's awesome. So it sounds like your digital origin story is evolving or has been evolving over the years, as well as yours, Lori. So let's go into our next section, which is called Bits and Bytes. Bytes for those, BYTES, where we talk about tidbits or technical issues. So in this segment, I'm going to let Lori ask some questions and about a little bit more about design and learning.
Okay, well, thanks for passing that off, Brenda. So now on to bits and bytes, and I'm just going to ask you a few questions because I went to your recent webinar at Cidi Labs called Why Design Matters, and it really touches into my particular interests in online education, is how design impacts learning. So there were 3 research citations that we're going to discuss today that I thought were really interesting from the webinar are: design is the most influential measure of instructional characteristics that potentially increase student outcomes. Underrepresented students' academic performance was positively impacted by content design and delivery. And content design and delivery positively related to all students' perception of their learning, while content itself had the least impact. Let's talk about these. First, design is the most influential measure of instructional characteristics that potentially increases student outcomes. So, Kristin, let's talk about that. Why does design increase student outcomes?
Yeah, well, first, shout out to Data, DETA, who did the research behind this. They're doing some really amazing work trying to identify the factors in online learning that are really helping students. So design being one of the ones that they identified. The thing that I think about as like an example is how student outcomes and design relate is even in the real world. If you have to take a test and someone says, this is a really important high stakes test, and you're going to do it in a busy airport terminal and you get no headphones and you get all this noise around you and have all these distractions, it's going to be very hard for that learner to do their best, to be their best. Whereas if I say, okay, high stakes test, but I'm putting you in a Zen garden and you get a nice glass of hot tea next to you and all the support you need, anytime you need help will come and help you. Like those 2 real life scenarios, we can sort of mimic those in online learning with design. We can think about what does it look like to make a space for them that's secure and safe and low risk, and it's also helping them focus and giving them just the information they need and not too much. And so creating a space for students to help them do their best is how we connect design and outcomes. I also think that there's some important things about, lowering cognitive load, creating more inclusivity, more relevant choices, fewer distraction. All of these are design choices that we as instructional designers and course designers can make for learners to help them do their best. And when we think about online learning as sort of this experience that maybe not everyone has had before, right? It's a new experience to a lot of first-generation learners. It's a new experience to, we'll talk more about underrepresented populations. They may not have had this deep experience of working online that we have, and so navigating it can be a challenge. So we also want to think about what does that look like to create a framework of support for them so that they can be their best, do their best, and improve their overall success as learners and going through whatever program or course of study they're going through. We want people to think more about the design rather than, I have all the content there, what's the problem? Why are students struggling? I don't understand. And so getting people to make more thoughtful decisions means that their students have an opportunity to do their best. Whereas in a classroom, you could come by and you can help remediate immediately, but in an online experience, you can't do that. And so design has to be more thoughtful into creating a scenario that a student can feel like it's not going to be high risk, it's not going to ruin their life, these things that change their way of interacting with the learning experience. So yeah, design can be really powerful if it's done right.
It can.
or negative if it's done wrong,
right. And Kristin, if you could give us an example of what that design and making a Zen experience in the online world might look like, just an example.
Yeah, well, if you think about our brains and how our brains are so sensitive to light, color, sound, movement, take color as a really good example. When you're looking at designing a course page, you want to think about a number of different things. You want to think about the colors that are going to attract the eye, pull the eye a certain place, and colors like red and yellow do that. But some of those colors aren't always accessible. So you have to think about accessibility and red-green color blindness and contrast and making sure you have enough differentiation between these things. If you imagine a page that's white text with yellow buttons, right? This just hurts your eyes when you imagine it, right?
Thinking about it hurts, yes.
So there's combinations of these things that very simple changes could make that easier to read, easier to parse information, better for the learner to be able to know what's important. Sometimes people put two buttons next to each other, one's red and one's green. And it's like one of them's a bad go back, I don't want this, cancel, and one of them's green, go forward. But if you've got red-green color blindness, they're the same. And unless the words are really well marked, then the learner doesn't know what the choices actually mean. And so color can be a signifier of like the type of content they're going to interact with, or if they're going to do something where one button that means go forward is always the same color. And so having some consistency to the styling. So these are just small decisions, but they have big impact on the learners long term when you think about they're not just looking at one page in a course. They're going to be going through an entire course, potentially an entire program online, right? And in which case, having that consistency of colors meaning the same thing, being used for the same thing, and also being accessible, it matters a lot to the learner.
Thanks. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, now on to our second statement. I'll just repeat it. Underrepresented students' academic performance was positively impacted by content design and delivery. Kristin, on to you. So let's talk about underrepresented students' academic performance.
Yeah, I thought this was really an amazing piece of research. This also is coming out of the data research, DETA. And I know that they're still collecting more data on this, DETA. But I can speak from my own experience with working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, because they explicitly wanted information on low-income first-generation minority learners. And what that research showed was that when you're thinking about these learners, they're not your typical, 18 to 22 college student who's coming from some sort of privileged family background. They're coming from environments where they may not have had the technological savvy. They're coming from environments where they maybe don't have access to the same, media things that we're kind of inundated with, or cell phones and things like that. So there's this idea that being able to give them an online learning experience that shows them really clearly, start here. There's a big button that says start here, and then it's really chunked well, and they're not getting overwhelmed by content that's like scrolling for, days. And so that type of decision making where the page takes into account that the learner is coming from a place of maybe not being familiar with these things. And that gives them a chance to feel included, gives them a chance to succeed. We see, online learning is so inherently flexible that our learners are so diverse now that designing for inclusivity and designing for accessibility needs to be top of mind. It needs to be the thing that we do first, not an afterthought. And the underrepresented student populations are the ones who are going to benefit just as much as someone who maybe has a learning disability, because we're designing for people who are needing that kind of inclusivity and support in the design. And so being able to look at this research that's coming in about this population, I'm not surprised, but I think it's awesome that we're seeing this data, and we can help maybe change some of the opinions of people who are creating or designing or teaching these courses, that they should change how they're setting up their course pages. They should change how they're organizing their materials, because structure matters, the design matters, and that's what we care about.
Yeah, cool.
All right, and the last one is a little bit of a dual statement. They're kind of two together, but they actually correlate. So, content design and delivery positively related to all students' perception of their learning, and content itself had the least impact. So how does student perception of design affect learning?
Yeah. So in my prior job, my title was Director of Storytelling, and I adopted that title because storytelling is one of the things that's the thoroughfare through all my work, all my undergrad work, all my master's work. It was always about the stories we tell and how they matter and affect us. And so from a learner's point of view, their perception of a course page, when they open it for the first time, they're telling themselves a story. What is this course going to be like for me? What am I going to do in this course? How am I going to do in this course? And that story can go a variety of different ways. But if the first time that they open a page and it's blocks of text that they're scrolling and it's really dense and there's no pictures and there's no interaction, there's no stop and check your reading, like how are you doing so far? There's no support, go here for help. Those things can feel intensely overwhelming for a learner. And they might start telling themselves, I can't do this. I can't do this. This is too hard. I'm not going to be able to make it. And that changes their ability to actually function in the course. It's like when a doctor tells you, this is going to hurt. Your brain actually releases chemicals in preparation for pain. So as a learner, if you're saying, this is going to suck, I'm going to be terrible at this, they're preparing themselves for the worst case scenario. And so their outcomes are actually affected by that. And when we think about the way that this could be sort of flipped and done really well, gamified learning does this really well because they create a story that students can dive into, and there's points and there's rewards and there's a feeling of making progress. And so there are types of things that we can do as designers to leverage the fact that we're telling ourselves a story about our learning experience and make it more low risk, make it more fun, make it more engaging, make it so that they're feeling positive about their experience, which can positively impact their outcomes.
Can you give us some examples of other kinds of touch points, positive feedback that you can design in courses?
Well, I think progress indicators are a great, simple one, right? You have an idea of a student not knowing where they are in a course, how much they have left, how far they've gotten, not feeling like they've made progress, versus a student who sees like, oh, I've done 3 of 7 and I've got this many left to go. I know that I can complete this. I know it took me this long. And so those stories are drastically different, just telling a student where they are and how much they have left to complete.
I like how you are not just only saying that designers can create these stories in a course, but also that whether people think it's real or not, students themselves are having that story-like experience where I can do this, or I can't do this, or right, where am I? Or I know exactly where I am. And I think that's a point to know that whether we think it's real or not, students do have those stories. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not a blank slate.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that sometimes when people who are designing courses for the first time, they think, and this is sort of the content question, right? They think if I've got my content here, I've got my videos, I've got my reading, what else is there? Well, there's the learner who's on the other side of this, who's going to come at this with their own personal experience, their own background, their highs and lows of education. They may have had terrible experiences with math instructors, or maybe they hated certain chemistry classes, and you never know what they're going to bring to that experience. And so designing in a way that is really attentive to being able to make it the best possible experience for them. And sometimes it's little things like we're talking about color, progress indicators, chunking content. Little stuff can make a huge difference in that student's ability to feel like they see themselves in that learning experience, right? They see themselves completing that course. They see themselves learning that thing and being able to do well on that test. And it's empowering to them, right? And that's the thing that we love when we do a good job as designers or as instructors. When somebody says, "I got it! I figured it out!" Like that's the moment where we feel we've done an amazing job because the learner actually saw themselves and actualized it.
Mm-hmm. I do some of that myself, just instinctually in my online course. I like to sometimes give digital stickers.
Oh, yeah.
For feedback. I know it's kind of cheesy, but
I love stickers.
Do what you want.
I just like find little things and put it on there for their feedback. Or I will, at the end of a module, I'll be like, okay, now we finished the module on, typography. So now let's look at the live cam of Times Square.
Oh, yeah.
Because they have a live feed cam. Pick how many font faces you can shoot, you can identify.
That's cool.
Just little things like that. I mean, honestly, I don't have any analytics as to how many students have done that currently, but I hope that they like it.
Well, it sounds fun because it's like a real world example and it's something that they see every day and encounter but don't think of. And so you're giving that designer eyes to them to be like, oh, now they're looking for it. It's
always one of those things when you learn something new, you see it everywhere from then on out.
Oh, yeah. You're like, oh, there's a gazillion fonts. Where'd they come from?
Oh my gosh.
As designers, I do feel like many of these things come second nature to you. But if any one of our listeners is like, not a very good designer, I really want to care about people, but I don't really know what underrepresented students might need, or even I'm not a very good storyteller, where would you all even advise them to begin in getting better?
There's a couple organizations that do a really good job of having classes and training. Online Learning Consortium, Quality Matters. I've worked with both organizations. We're partners with both. They do a lot of good training, and conferences conferences are a great place to start if you've never done any of this work, just to get exposed to a bunch of different things.
Well, if you work at University of Florida,
yeah, there you go.
We have a few tools for you that COIP has developed.
Yeah, okay.
That, my team has developed, and we have template pages, snippets, and that you can automatically put in your course that will direct your students' attention and content chunks so they can easily digest new information.
Yeah.
That is just automatically put on a page, and then all you have to do is just fill it in.
Yeah, that's a good point, even just to see what other departments at your institution, school, university might have already created. Yeah. And if you're at UF, we got some.
Yeah, and then there's the Canvas Commons.
Oh, yeah.
Has some resources in there too.
People are using Canvas as your LMS.
We at Cidi Labs just started a Cidi Labs library as well, which is something we're building sort of like Canvas Commons. So templates, chunking, snippets, things like that for people who are using our tools.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So if anyone is floundering, you are not alone. There are things.
There's resources.
There are resources. You can do it.
Yeah.
All right. So our last segment, Tech Forward. What new designs will help student learning?
So I love this question, and there were a number of ways my brain sort of were trying to answer it. I think the first thing that I see as imperative is thinking about inclusivity and accessibility as first order of business instead of an afterthought checkpoint. That makes such a difference in the design, and it helps so many more students, and it helps everybody be their best. It just gives everyone an opportunity equally. So that was sort of one thing. The other thing that I gathered over my years of doing this work in different places is that a lot of times when design happens, it's happening in like this isolated spot, like one course is being redesigned, or this one part of a course or a program, but we don't often get to design an entire program from start to finish, thinking about the user experience, the learner experience. Wouldn't that be amazing to go, let's start with their end objectives for this entire program, and then how do we design the entire program for them with that in mind? And what does that mean for their ups and downs of the program? What does that mean for their wins? How do we make sure that they're getting enough feedback across the program? How do we make sure that we get them progress across the program, rather than just progress in a course, but like progress across a program? That feedback, that motivation, that engagement, we could do so much more. And I don't think we get enough opportunities to do that, sadly, just because of how academia works. And then I was thinking about how things are changing because of technologies. So AI is the thing right now. Every conference I go to, it's like 90% of the sessions are AI related. Right. But I think for me, I'm excited about this because it's forcing people to rethink how they design assessments. It's forcing people to think, well, if I have a forum response as part of their grade, and ChatGPT can write that pretty well, how do I need to rethink this assessment so that I'm actually giving them, a relevant contextual use of the skills that I'm asking them to perform, but do it in a different way. And so I'm excited about that. I think it's going to force us to do more real-world applications of learning and particularly in assessment. And then the last little part I was thinking about is just the speed at which education moves and the speed at which contemporary media culture moves. And they're very different. Right. But when we look back to perceptions, right? A learner's perception is with contemporary media. A learner's perception isn't with the slow pace of snail education. So when I worked at the educational game company, there were students who, 15 telling us, well, why doesn't this look like, you know, my Grand Theft Auto game? And we're like, well, because it's education and it has to run on the school's computers and the school's internet and all of these things. And we have all of these boundaries to what we can and can't do. And I'm hoping that in the future, as we move forward, that those boundaries break down, that like the ability for us to design learning that actually matches the modern website designs that are doing that. And I think that would help students feel like it's more relevant to them because it's looking more modern, because it's more interactive, it's more engaging. And we know that an engaged student is a student who's more likely to succeed. So those are kind of a bunch of different thoughts about design.
No, thank you for sharing those ideas with us. And thank you, Lori, for double duty today as co-host and guest.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks, Brenda.
I was disappointed you didn't use 2 different voices.
I know. That'd been really funny. Hi, I am co-host Lori and guest Lori. And thank you, Kristin, for taking the time to join us and sharing with us your ideas and your past. Yeah.
It's a blast.
And thank you, those listening and watching. Until next time, we hope you keep designing beautiful courses.